Before there was metal, before there was writing, before we called anything design, there was reach. A hand closed around a branch, not to hold it but to send it. That gesture, simple, desperate, elegant, was the first time thought left the body. Every tool since is only an echo of that moment. The spear is not merely an artifact. It's a conversation between three equal partners: form, material and use, geometry, substance and purpose. Every age rephrases that conversation in its own grammar, but the question remains the same. How far can the human will extend before it breaks? Today, we'll walk through the spear's history, not as a list of technologies, but as a series of relationships. Each stage a triad of necessity: how shape dictates substance, how substance dictates possibility, and how possibility becomes habit, ritual, and finally, thought. We will move through the forests of the Paleolithic, the bronze glare of the phalanx, the iron storm of empire, and the carbon whisper of the modern javelin. Along the way, you'll see how every refinement of the spear also refines the mind. How each change in wood and metal mirrors an evolution in cooperation, in foresight, in imagination. You'll notice the rhythm. Form suggests. Material answers. Use completes. And when we reach the end, when the spear no longer hunts nor defends but flies for distance alone, perhaps we'll see that what it always sought was not blood, but continuity, a way for intent to keep traveling after the hand lets go. Now, step back into the marsh, into the cold breath of evening. The herd waits. The first reach is about to happen. Evening breathes cold over the marsh, and the herd's backs rise like islands in a darkening sea. A hunter fingers a sapling the way a sailor tests a mast, sighting along it until the world straightens. Fire has kissed the tip to ash hardness, a smouldering tooth that remembers flame without bearing it. He rolls the shaft in his palms, feeling the grain run like sinew beneath bark-thin skin. When he moves, the band moves with him, soft-footed, the ground whispering under pads of hide. He draws back the long arm the tree has given him, breath shallow, eyes wide to the dusk. The throw leaves his body like a withheld word finally spoken, quiet, committed, irrevocable. For a heartbeat, the shaft becomes a path between lives. Then comes the heavy answer of impact. Length here isn't bravado, it's a treaty with distance, negotiated in the silent grammar of wood. Straight grain is the difference between a promise and a lie, between a true flight line and a wandering aim. He chose a tree that bends and comes back, not one that argues and splits along its spiral. The fire-hard tip holds its memory of sap, yielding before it shatters. Balance lives near the center, slightly forward, so the nose knows which way the world should face. There is no socket, no binding, only the seamless thread from root to arm to throw. Repair means a knife and a fire. Replacement is a walk in the forest with eyes tuned to straightness. Every act of craft is a survival decision. Every throw is a rehearsal for tomorrow's hunger. Form, material, and use unfold with feral clarity. A long shaft demands straight-grained wood, which makes distance hunting possible. Shorten the shaft and you step closer to danger. Accept crooked grain and you surrender aim to the wind. Use is born not from fantasy, but from what the wood permits and the body can repeat. This is inclusion in its rawest sense. Each element enables the next, and the loop teaches the hand. The spear isn't just a sharpened stick, it's a relationship made durable through understanding. The animal becomes meat because geometry became intention, and intention found a willing material. The mind lengthens with the arm, learning to see in lines rather than leaps. When reach becomes reliable, cooperation stops being hope and starts being plan. Pitch warms near the coals, resin breathing its honeyed smoke as flint is coaxed thin as ice. A napper levers light from stone, flaking edges into a leaf that looks capable of cutting wind. Sinew waits in a shallow dish, a quiet rope, while the shaft is scraped to a throat for the coming crown. When the head meets the wood, glue and fiber marry them under the blessing of heat and patience. The hunt opens in the river grass, and the spear flies not only to wound but to stay. It bites through hide and into bone, and when the animal runs, the weapon's will runs with it. The hunter doesn't give chase, he gives design, and design holds fast where hands cannot. Breath slows because the world has been lengthened and steadied by a knot and a cure. Now forward balance is deliberate, a nose-heavy confidence that steadies flight like a keel in wind. The leaf profile is a compromise that doesn't compromise puncture first, then a mouth wide enough to bleed. Binding is chosen for wet strength, glue for shock, shaft for flex that forgives a heartbeat of error. Barbs speak a different dialect of the same desire. If the point enters, let it argue about leaving. The head can be salvaged when wood fails, and that means repair becomes culture, not luck. The joint is the true invention. It spreads force, localizes failure, and makes replacement a craft. The thrower becomes a maintainer. The hunter becomes a maker. Resilience is written into the haft. Each material knows its job, and the whole knows how to continue after the first impact. Form, material, and use now perform like a well-made knot. Forward-weighted geometry calls for resin and sinew, creating a spear that can strike, stay, and return. This is reinforcement made tangible, each link strengthening the promise of the next. Balance without bonding is arrogance. Bonding without balance is a complaint to gravity. Use dictates that the spear become more than a moment. Its action must have aftermath. The animal runs with a countdown lodged in its side. Design has made time into a second blade. Risk shrinks not by luck, but by the choreography of weight and glue. When the shaft is rebuilt around a surviving head, it's a rehearsal for victory without blood. The system is learning to endure, not just to strike, and endurance is the first civility. Sun burns on a field of metal leaves, each one shaking light into the morning like fish scales in a net. Shields overlap with a sound like doors closing. The front rank plants its feet as if rooting. The command isn't shouted, it travels the line in breath, in timing, in rehearsal remembered by wrists. Spears thrust in rhythm, forward, bite, withdraw, reset, a glittering irrigation of air. The tooth at each tip is no longer a hunter's loneliness. It is a city's grammar spoken in unison. Dust hangs sweet and bitter. The ground thuds with feet that only move when the line moves. Now the spear is more than a weapon. It's an instrument that requires 100 hands to play. The herd is gone. The prey now wears a crested helmet and carries someone else's lore. Bronze arrives not just as sharper edge but as socket, a mechanical humility that saves wood from splitting. Ash or yew is chosen for fibers that behave under torsion and thrust. The shaft as spine to the head's brain. Ferrules cap the butt so the ground's answer doesn't climb and shatter the speech of the handle. The leaf-shaped head punctures and slices, letting a disciplined wrist write decisive lines on moving armor. Length is modest because endurance must be long. A soldier needs hours of competence, not a minute of spectacle. Standardization breeds predictability. Predictability breeds tactics. Tactics are civilization's way of walking. Each dory, each spear, is less a thing than a part of a sentence whose subject is we. Metalwork has turned a branch into policy, a blade into a boundary line that can be moved or held. Form, material, and use now compose public order. A balanced form, a bronze leaf head, a socket that enables phalanx thrusting. Remove the socket and the wood splits. Remove the bronze and geometry flinches back to crude. This is cause made visible. Metallurgy births geometry. Geometry births formation. Formation births the city's reach. Use no longer chases meat. It now steers borders, harvests obedience, and buys time for other crafts. Each failure becomes legislation in the forge, every broken spear a line item in the next generation of heads. The spear stops being an event and becomes a system. The system learns to speak longer than a shout. A city that can thrust together can also plant together, irrigate together, bury together. In the mirror of bronze, the face peering back is collective, and the point is, it's pen. Before blade meets blade, the air darkens with intent. It's like a slow, heavy rain of iron decisions. Shields lift like awnings, But those first impacts aren't really bruises, they're invitations to carry weight. A point punches through boss and board, and the long shank behind it just surrenders its straightness with a sigh. Now, the shield is less cover and more anchor, a bad habit hanging from the arm. Men tug and curse, formations bulge where they should be flat, and momentum just drains away. The peeler do not return to their throwers, and honestly, that's no loss. That's design. It's victory planned for the space after contact, a second choreography the enemy must dance, even if they don't want to. By the time swords flash, the ground has already tilted beneath the weight of bent iron. The materials confess their cunning openly, a tempered point to pierce, a mild shank to yield. Forward balance keeps the nose honest against wind and wobble, and weight is a promise to gravity worth keeping. The shank's obedience to bending is a feature, not a flaw, reliability through controlled ruin. Manufacture becomes a rumor of state capacity, logistics, the quiet muscle under tactics. This is design that knows tools don't need to survive if their consequences will. The enemy must choose, discard the shield or fight while encumbered. Neither choice is free. A weapon that can break on purpose turns failure into advantage and scrap into strategy. Where bronze once argued for recovery, iron now argues for denial, and denial wins before the duel even begins. Form, material, and use here bend time. A forward-weighted spear with a sacrificial shank pairs a tempered head with a yielding body for deliberate disruption. Success is measured not by the weapon's survival, but by the enemy's disorder. This is non-linear warfare. The payoff isn't in the strike, but in the aftermath. Form carries a plan that survives the throw. Material obeys by failing in the right place at the right time. Use becomes choreography rather than contest. The battlefield a machine whose gears are shields and men. The spear's meaning has shifted from killing to compelling, and compulsion is quieter power. Change one leg of the triad, and you alter not just the result, but the sequence of results. That is strategy, arranging effects, so even resistance contributes to your aim. At dawn, the square of men breathes like a single animal, exhaling frost through 1,000 narrow pipes. The forest they carry points outward, patient and jealous, a geometry horses read and refuse. A test comes, a canter, a trumpet, then a veer, as mounts do the math faster than their riders. The pike is not nimble, it is inevitable, a hedge that brings the future nearer for anything that dares to pass. Ranks trade sweat for steadiness, feet find the drilled distances, shoulders memorize their pain. A pike too long for one man becomes exactly right when every man agrees. The enemy isn't repelled by heroism but by arithmetic, and arithmetic is exhausting to charge. When the wall holds, it does so quietly, like a well-built bridge you only notice when it fails. But length is a tyrant disguised as salvation, and the pike's promise carries its demands. Lamination tames warp. Aligned grain builds discipline into the very wood. Sockets grow deep and forgiving. The butt wears a ferrule to negotiate with earth without splitting because, well, the ground hits back. Diameter is dieted to meet the arm halfway. Mass is walked toward the point and coaxed back to balance. This is not craftsmanship for glory, it's craftsmanship for reliability. Production moves from cottage to arsenal. Repair moves from cleverness to procedure. The weapon accepts its role as citizen, not champion. It belongs to the crowd, not the hero. In the pike, culture learns that strength is often a function of how well parts agree. Form, material, and use converge. A very long shaft demands laminated ash and stout sockets, enabling formation defense. Use short or green wood, and length becomes liability. Shorten the form, and cavalry negotiates the rest. This is convergence made manifest. Only the union of length, lamination, and connection conjures the wall. Use isn't possible without material obedience. Form isn't survivable without connection wisdom. When all three align, fear migrates to the other side of the line, and that's all a defense ever asks for. The lesson isn't romantic but reliable. Coordination itself becomes a material property when you make enough of the same thing. Change one leg and you don't weaken the spear, you dissolve the square. The greatest weapons of this age are agreements written in wood and muscle. Mist lifts along a pine road as a Yari slides from the shadow of a sleeve. Hands spaced for leverage, the bearer directs a needlepoint into the seams of armor as if writing a secret. Each step is an answer to the last, a grammar of distance that never overcommits the center. In another morning, sun hits red earth, and an Ikalwa hammers beneath a shield rim with a twist and a breath. Here, closeness is courage. There, reach is craft. In both, conviction is edge. Crow calls and drums tell twin truths. Space can be weapon, and so can its denial. The spear is not a universal noun. It is a local verb, conjugated by terrain, law, and appetite. Two theaters, one principal doctrine, writes the choreography the body will trust when afraid. Materials attend doctrine like armorers at a general's tent. Respectful, opinionated, essential. Rattan and oak, ash and bamboo, each chosen for how it argues with impact and weather. Lacquer seals time into wood. Layered steel keeps an edge that bites without chipping on bone. Socket or tang, oval or round, every shaft tells you what wrists will be at work. Short forms reward torsional strength. Long forms reward footwork and patience. Local glues, local oils, local ferrules. Nothing here is generic because nothing here is theoretical. Every choice is proof of battle, refined on riverbanks, courtyards and plains. A culture's spear is its distance made visible, between fighters, between villages, between heaven and ground. Form, material and use move together under doctrine. Strategy chooses the form, short thrust or long reach. Materials make it real, and use ingrains it until it's reflex. This is conjunction at work. Strategy sitting between the other two and pulling them toward its center. Try to import a blade without its drills, and you'll hear wood and men complain. Impose doctrine on a forest that won't yield straight shafts and you'll teach failure instead of victory. When they agree, everything feels inevitable. When they don't, everything feels cursed. The spear is citizen of its ecology as much as its polity, and both vote with consequences. Design is policy made tactile. Policy is design made durable. To read a spear is to read a people's answer to one question. At what distance do we live? The line fires, and the field turns to cloud. When the world returns, it does so at arm's length. Orders slice through haze, and steel buds at muzzle mouths, small and implacable as winter fruit. Men who were wind and powder become bark and thorn, hedges raised by a practiced twist. The charge becomes a heartbeat negotiation. How much space is left for courage? Where pikes once drew long sentences, the bayonet writes quick verbs. Hold, fix, thrust, repel. It's not drama, it's continuity, a way to keep the thread when smoke tries to cut it. The old reach survives by riding the new noise, and noise does not argue, it only interrupts. When the lines meet, steel remembers what powder tried to replace and refuses to be forgotten. The blade is short because its host is long, stiffness high because leverage is low. Triangular sections resist bending, cut clean through cloth and flesh without lodging. The socket is humble but precise. Don't block the sights, don't slip, don't come loose when braced. Hardened tips promise integrity. Tempered shoulders whisper, we will flex before we fail. Mounting and unmounting become a liturgy, drilled until hands pray without thought. Manufacture favors interchangeability. The army favors anything that works the same in storm or square. Powder, ball, and socketed blade form an ecology of timing. Fire to thin, steel to finish, discipline to endure. What was once a forest carried on backs is now a thorn that blooms only when needed. Form, material, and use integrate fully. A short, rigid form with hardened steel and secure socket allows two states, ranged and close. This is integration as survival. Old logic grafted onto new trunks so sap can still flow. Remove the socket, and you have a knife sulking on a barrel. Lengthen the blade, and you invite clumsiness into the musket's rhythm. Use now depends on switching states with speed. A mechanical bilingualism under stress. Form is disciplined by its host. Material is disciplined by the form. Use disciplines both during crisis. The spear doesn't vanish, it condenses, stored as tension in the metal. When called, it conjugates instantly, and the line remembers how to stand. Iron arrives with traders and soldiers, a new weather that wets every forge it touches. Smiths listen to unfamiliar metal and answer in their own tongues, grinds, sockets, shapes that remember home. A broad blade takes a local shaft and the old dance gains an accent, then a dialect, then a reply. On the morning of a raid or defense, the new weight in the hand feels like both inheritance and wager. The thrower becomes a stabber, the stabber becomes a catcher. Shields learn new routes. Repair benches learn new habits. Wedges and bindings tune to sockets that ask different questions. Iron is not neutral. It moves the balance point forward and makes the wrist speak more sharply. Where material crosses a border, tactics cross back, and the field becomes negotiation. The hybrid is more than some, it's a conversation between failure and trust. Imported steel bites deeper, but demands stronger sockets, shoulders, and glues. Local hardwoods understand the climate and argue gently with humidity. Iron argues loudly with rust. Bindings multiply, rawhide, fiber, wire, each a voice in the chorus of survival. Supply is irregular, so cleverness becomes doctrine. Reuse, regrind, repurpose, rethink. A form that once flew now prefers to stay. A style that loved distance now drinks proximity. The fight is not only against an enemy but against misfit, between new materials and old motions. Cultures that win this argument are those that teach their hands new endings to old songs. Form, material, and use find harmony under pressure. Local form meets imported iron, and tactics evolve to fit both. This is harmony forged by necessity. Conflict turned to chord when meaning and matter are tuned together. Force a foreign head onto a shaft without adjusting your grip, and you'll learn pain. Adjust, and you'll learn power. Use is rewritten one elbow at a time. Balance rediscovered one parry at a time. Form listens to material and decides to shorten, to thicken, to find a new center of gravity. Material listens back, asking for oil, for scabbards, for sleeves against rain. When both listen to use, a living weapon emerges, neither imitation nor relic. Hybridization is not compromise, it's evolution under selective fire. The stadium holds its breath the way a forest holds snow, quietly, everywhere at once. A runner becomes a metronome, steps tightening until the line between footfall and heartbeat blurs. The javelin leans along the arm like a promise kept too long. Then the hips unscroll the horizon. Release is a whisper masked as a shout, the nose tilting down as if reading the future. The spear leaves not for blood but for distance, that older hunger with fewer funerals. It arcs into silence that buzzes, a melody of air written without a stave. When it lands, the field receives it cleanly, and someone somewhere dreams of a meter farther. The crowd exhales, and for a moment everyone has an extra joint in the shoulder. What began as sap and ash is now fiber and resin, stiffness tuned like strings on a patient instrument. Mass walks along the shaft in grams, not guesses, marching toward a center the hand can predict at speed. Sections vary so that bend stores energy for release instead of wasting it as noise. Tip geometry negotiates with air, not bone, seeking a path that resists flutter and finds glide. Surface finish is not decoration. It's diplomacy with friction, the air's handshake. Athletes and engineers co-author a body that remembers every millisecond of approach. Failure modes are new. Oscillation, pitch, heel, not splinter and snap. And so the craft adapts. The javelin is a study in cooperation between physics and desire, and both are excellent teachers. Form, material, and use combine under a new morality. Composite design and tuned balance create pure flight. This is combination reborn, athletic, symbolic, and technical ends braided into one clean throw. The lesson hasn't changed, the arm wants to be longer, and the mind wants to know how. Form proposes a path the body can trust, material permits it, use refines it until it sings. Change one leg and the music changes key, Sometimes it modulates, sometimes it goes silent. Even without enemies, the spear keeps its thesis. We reach, therefore we are. Design remains the conversation between what we can hold, what we can make, and what we must do. Every era answers with its own accent, but the sentence is always about distance becoming possibility. Across the ages, the spear keeps asking the same question in different tongues. How shall intention pass through matter without losing its aim? Each answer changes its tools but never its grammar. Form reaches forward. Material replies. Use reconciles the two. Together they form a rhythm, not just of weapons but of thought. This rhythm does not end in the javelin or the bayonet. It continues in every act of making. You can hear it in the tuning of a violin, in the joining of timber and steel in a bridge, in the coded handshake of a signal across space. Everywhere the triad repeats, shape proposing, substance consenting, purpose resolving. It's how civilizations learn to think through their hands. When we understand this pattern, history stops being a sequence of inventions and becomes a study of relationships, between desire and limitation, between imagination and what the world will bear. Every creation, tool, idea, society, begins as reach, tempered by what resists it, refined by what endures. The spear simply made that visible first. So when we speak of balance, of design, of systems that must work together or fail together, we are still whispering the old grammar of the marsh and the fire-hardened point. The lesson remains, everything extends from something else. To lengthen the arm is to lengthen the mind. To balance the weight is to balance the will. And every time we throw, whether a spear, a word, or a hope, we are still trying to measure the distance between what we can touch and what we can imagine.